The weight of silence hung in the car as we drove to Dr. Lisa Caldwell's office. My husband, James, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the black leather. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring out the window, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The tension between us was a palpable force, the kind of thick, heavy thing you could almost choke on. It had been James's idea to see a therapist. A last-ditch effort, he had said. We owe it to ourselves and to what we had, he insisted. What we had. Past tense. The word stung like a slap. When we arrived, the office felt too warm, too bright. The soft beige walls and shelves of carefully curated books seemed designed to lull you into a false sense of comfort. Dr. Caldwell herself was poised, professional, and just perfect. Her blonde hair was pulled into a sleek bun, her green eyes sharp but empathetic. She smiled warmly as she ushered us in, gesturing to a pair of plush chairs across from her desk. So James, Emma, she began, her voice smooth and melodic, why don't we start by talking about what brought you here? James spoke first, of course. He always did. His words were measured, his tone calm, practiced even. We've been struggling with communication. It feels like we're not on the same page anymore. Not on the same page. That was a polite way to say we were living as strangers. I waited for him to elaborate, to mention the arguments, the cold nights, the way we avoided each other like landmines. But he didn't. He just sat back as though he'd said enough. I forced a tight smile. I feel like James has been distant. Distracted, maybe. And I'm not sure why. Dr. Caldwell nodded, her gaze shifting between us, piercing but kind. These feelings of disconnection are common, especially in long-term relationships. The important thing is to address them openly and honestly. Let's start with trust. Do you feel like you trust each other? James hesitated, but I didn't. I don't know, I admitted. My voice cracked and I hated the vulnerability in it. Lately, it feels like there's a wall between us, and I can't figure out how to break through. Dr. Caldwell leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. Emma, it's okay to feel that way. Sometimes disconnection can stem from unresolved issues or unspoken fears. Let's explore that. As the sessions progressed over the following weeks, I started to feel a flicker of hope. Dr. Caldwell was insightful, her questions cutting through layers I hadn't realized we'd built. James seemed more engaged, too, opening up about work stress, family expectations, and his own feelings of inadequacy. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A small, hesitant step forward. Until it wasn't. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when everything unraveled. We had just finished a particularly raw session, one where James had admitted he'd felt emotionally distant because he didn't feel worthy of me. It should have been a breakthrough, but something about the way Dr. Caldwell had looked at him during his confession lingered in my mind. A flash of something in her eyes, was it pity? Or was it something more? Later that evening, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling. I replayed moments in my head, the subtle way Dr. Caldwell's gaze lingered on James, the way her voice softened when she addressed him. Paranoia, I told myself. Therapists are trained to be empathetic. But the unease gnawed at me. The turning point came when James left his phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed with a notification, and before I could stop myself, I glanced at the screen. Lisa Caldwell. Can't stop thinking about our time together. Let me know when you can talk. My heart stopped. For a moment, the world tilted, my breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the phone, my hands trembling, and scrolled up. The messages were there, plain as day. Weeks of secret texts, cryptic at first, then unmistakably intimate. You make me feel alive again. I miss the way you kissed me. I stumbled back, my knees weak. The walls of my carefully controlled life crumbled around me. My husband, my James, had been having an affair with our therapist, the very woman who was supposed to help us rebuild. The confrontation was explosive. James returned home to find me pacing the living room, the phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. I hurled the evidence at him, my voice raw with fury and betrayal. How could you? With her? After everything? James paled, his mask of calm shattering. Emma, I can explain. Explain? I screamed. Explain how you brought me to her knowing she was your mistress? Explain how you sat there and lied to my face week after week. He stammered, searching for words, but there were none that could fix this. The weight of his betrayal was suffocating, and I felt like I was drowning. But the real twist came when I confronted Dr. Caldwell. I called her office the next day, demanding an immediate meeting. To her credit, she didn't deny it. She sat across from me, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Emma, I never meant for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "James and it was a mistake. But it ended before you started therapy. I thought I could handle being professional, but I see now that I was wrong." Her confession should have brought clarity, but it only deepened my despair. I stared at her, this woman who had been privy to my most vulnerable moments, and I saw nothing but betrayal. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I whispered. "You didn't just ruin my marriage. You made me believe in you. You made me think I could trust you." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I walked out of her office and never looked back. In the aftermath, James begged for forgiveness. He claimed the affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness during a rough patch in our marriage. But his words felt hollow, and I couldn't bring myself to believe them. I filed for divorce a month later. It's been a year now. I've moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far from the memories of our old life. Real therapy has helped me piece myself back together. I'm learning to trust myself again, to find strength in my own voice. As for James and Dr. Caldwell, I don't know what became of them. Y don't care tú. They're just ghosts now, shadows of a life I've left behind. What I do know is this: betrayal doesn't define me. Broke me, yes, but it also forced me to rebuild. And in that rebuilding, I found something I thought I'd lost forever: myself. The days after the divorce were a strange blend of relief and despair. I felt unmoored, as though someone had cut the anchor that tethered me to the life I thought I knew. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in being James's wife, the woman who kept our lives running smoothly, the one who tried to fix things when they fell apart. Now I was just Emma, alone, uncertain, and painfully aware of the cracks I had tried to ignore for years. One of the first things I did after moving out was delete James's number from my phone. It felt symbolic, like removing the last thread tying me to him. I didn't want to be tempted to reach out, to ask him why again, or to hear his empty apologies. He had already tried calling a dozen times after I left, but I ignored him. What could he possibly say that would make any of this better? Instead, I focused on small, tangible tasks. I painted the walls of my new apartment a soft, calming blue and filled the space with plants, green, vibrant, alive. It was the opposite of the sterile, pristine decor James had always preferred. This was mine. Every decision, every object was chosen by me for me. It felt like a tiny rebellion, a declaration of independence. My real turning point came when I decided to return to therapy, not with Dr. Caldwell, of course. I found a new therapist, a middle-aged woman named Janet with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She didn't coddle me or offer platitudes. Instead, she asked the hard questions, the ones that forced me to confront the truths I'd been avoiding. "Why do you think you stayed with James for so long?" she asked during one session. I hesitated, twisting my hands in my lap. "Because I loved him," I said finally. But even as I spoke the words, they felt incomplete. Janet tilted her head, waiting. She always had a way of letting silence do the heavy lifting. "Because I was scared," I admitted after a moment. "Scared of being alone. Scared of failing. I thought if I just tried hard enough, if I could be better, then maybe he would stay." Her gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. "Emma, you weren't the one who failed. He made choices that were never about you. But now you have a choice too. What do you want your life to look like moving forward?" The question stuck with me long after the session ended. For so long, my life had been about James, what he needed, what he wanted, what would make him happy. But now, for the first time, I had the freedom to think about what he wanted. I started small. I signed up for a pottery class at a local community center, something I'd always been curious about but never had the time or permission to pursue. James had always dismissed hobbies as frivolous, but standing in front of that spinning wheel, my hands coated in clay, I felt a spark of joy I hadn't experienced in years. From there, I kept building. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. I began writing again, filling journals with thoughts, feelings, and even short stories. Writing had been my passion in college, but life and responsibilities had pushed it to the sidelines. Now it felt like rediscovering a part of myself I'd thought was lost. James reached out once about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. He sent a letter handwritten the way he used to write me notes when we first started dating. I stared at the envelope for hours before finally opening it. In the letter he apologized not just for the affair but for everything. For the years of emotional neglect, for making me feel like I wasn't enough, for dragging me into therapy with his mistress without a shred of shame. He said he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but he hoped I would find happiness, even if it wasn't with him. I read it once then burned it. Not out of anger but because I didn't need his closure. I had already started finding my own. One evening as I was walking home from the pottery studio, I passed a little bookstore I hadn't noticed before. It was cozy with a hand-painted sign that read the second chapter. Something about the name made me smile, and on a whim I stepped inside. The store was a treasure trove of mismatched shelves and overstuffed armchairs. A man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "First time here?" he asked. His voice was warm, inviting. I nodded. "Yeah, I just moved to the neighborhood." "Welcome," he said, gesturing to the shelves. "Take your time. We've got a little bit of everything." I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers over the spines of books. I picked up a battered copy of a novel I had loved in college and took it to the counter. The man rang me up, then hesitated. "You know, we do a book club here every Thursday evening. You should come by sometime." For a moment I almost declined out of habit. But then I thought of Janet's question. "What do you want your life to look like moving forward?" "I might just do that," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. The months turned into a year, then two. Life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of loneliness, still nights when the memories crept in like unwelcome guests. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. The book club became a regular part of my life, and so did the man from the bookstore. His name was Aaron, and he had a quiet, steady kindness that was nothing like James's polished charm. We took things slow, building a friendship first, then something more. He never made me feel like I had to prove myself or earn his love. With him I felt seen. One evening as we sat together in his tiny apartment, surrounded by books and the scent of freshly brewed coffee, he looked at me and said, "You've got this light about you, Emma. Like you've been through the storm and come out stronger on the other side." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I leaned back and thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding. He was right. I had been through the storm, and while it had nearly destroyed me, it had also revealed a strength I didn't know I had. "I think I finally believe that," I said softly, and for the first time I truly did. As life settled into a new rhythm, I found myself growing more comfortable in my own skin. The small victories felt monumental. Finding joy in simple routines, pursuing interests that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations, and embracing the freedom of starting over. Yet, despite all the progress, there was still a lingering unease buried deep within me, like a bruise that hadn't fully healed. One afternoon as I was reorganizing my bookshelf, a slip of paper fluttered out from an old journal. It was a list I'd made years ago, my dreams scrawled in messy handwriting on a page I'd forgotten. Write a book. Visit Paris. Learn how to paint. Open a coffee shop. Fall in love, really fall in love. Seeing those words transported me back to a time when everything seemed possible, before life's complications dulled the edges of my ambition. I read the list again and again, feeling an odd mix of nostalgia and determination. Maybe it was time to revisit those dreams. The first item on the list, writing a book, felt like the most natural place to start. The journals I had filled during my healing process were brimming with thoughts, emotions, and experiences I never imagined sharing with the world. But the more I read through them, the more I realized that my story might resonate with others who had felt broken and betrayed. I began piecing together a manuscript. The process was cathartic but also grueling. Reliving the darkest moments of my marriage, the betrayal, and the painful rebuilding wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. I poured everything into the pages. Raw honesty, vulnerability, and a quiet hope that others might find strength in my words. Aaron was my biggest cheerleader. He would sit across from me at the bookstore's small cafe, sipping his coffee and offering gentle encouragement. "You're braver than you think, Emma," he'd say whenever I doubted myself. Months later, I held the finished manuscript in my hands. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. With Aaron's encouragement, I submitted it to several publishers. Rejection letters trickled in at first, each one a small blow to my confidence. But then one morning an email arrived that changed everything. "We're thrilled to offer you a publishing contract." I must have read the email a dozen times before it sank in. My heart raced as I called Aaron, who immediately rushed over to celebrate. "You did it," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I knew you would." The book, titled After the Storm, was released 6 months later. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from readers who shared their own stories of heartbreak and resilience. Bookstores invited me for signings, and I even gave a few talks about my journey. Each time I felt a little more empowered, a little more certain that my pain had served a purpose beyond myself. As my career as an author blossomed, I began crossing more items off my list. Visiting Paris came next, a trip I took on my own. I wandered through art galleries, sipped espresso at quaint cafes, and wrote in my journal beneath the Eiffel Tower. It was a journey of self-discovery, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to share it with anyone to make it meaningful. When I returned, Aaron surprised me with an easel and a set of paints. "For number 3 on your list," he said with a grin. Painting became a new form of expression, one that didn't require words but still told a story. Life wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the scars of my past flared up, an unexpected memory, a fleeting pang of doubt. But those moments no longer consumed me. They were reminders of how far I'd come, of the strength I'd built from the wreckage. Aaron and I grew closer with each passing year. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was honest. We learned to navigate conflicts with patience and compassion, always striving to understand rather than blame. For the first time, I felt like I was part of a partnership built on equality and respect. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Aaron turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "I've been thinking," he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "About what?" I asked, setting down a glass. He took a deep breath. "About us. About our future." My heart fluttered as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Emma, I know your journey hasn't been easy, and I know I'm not part of every dream you've had. But if you'll let me, I want to be part of the ones you're still dreaming. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at the man who had stood by me through every step of my healing. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. 1,000 times yes. Our wedding was small, intimate, a gathering of close friends and family. There were no grand gestures, no elaborate decorations. Just love, pure and simple. Standing across from Aaron, I felt a peace I had never known before. As we exchanged vows, I thought about the last item on my list. Fall in love, really fall in love. I hadn't known it then, but that kind of love wasn't just about finding the right person. It was about learning to love myself first, to see my own worth and refuse to settle for less. Aaron didn't complete me. He complemented me. Together, we built a life that honored our individual dreams while creating new ones we could share. Years later, as I sat at a book signing for my latest novel, a young woman approached me. She held a battered copy of After the Storm, its pages dog-eared and filled with sticky notes. "Your book saved me," she said, her voice trembling. "I was in a toxic relationship, and reading your story gave me the courage to leave. Thank you." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "You saved yourself," I said, handing her the signed book. "I just gave you a nudge." That night, as I walked home, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the pain that had once threatened to break me, for the strength I'd found in its aftermath, and for the life I had built from the ruins. Life is rarely what we plan, but sometimes the unexpected detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be. And as I stepped through the door of the cozy apartment Aaron and I now shared, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally home. The years passed like chapters in a book, each one distinct yet interconnected. Life with Aaron was a far cry from the strained existence I'd endured with James. Ours was a partnership of mutual respect, love, and endless curiosity about each other. But it wasn't just about Aaron. The most fulfilling part of my life now was the deep sense of purpose I'd found in helping others, in turning my pain into something meaningful. After the success of After the Storm, opportunities seemed to flow in naturally. Publishers approached me for another book, but I wasn't ready to dive into fiction or memoirs just yet. Instead, I found myself increasingly drawn to public speaking and advocacy. My story had resonated with so many people, women especially, who felt trapped in their relationships or too broken to start again. At first, the idea of speaking in front of large audiences terrified me. I was used to pouring my heart out onto a page, safe behind the anonymity of words. But standing on a stage, bearing my soul to a crowd, required a different kind of bravery. Still, I said yes to every invitation. Women's conferences, universities, even a TED Talk eventually. Each time I stood in front of those audiences, I reminded myself of the young woman I used to be, desperate for a lifeline. If my words could be that for someone else, it was worth every moment of anxiety. The more I shared, the more I realized that my story wasn't just about infidelity or divorce. It was about resilience, self-worth, and the universal human struggle to rebuild after devastation. People from all walks of life approached me after my talks, men, women, young, old. Some shared their own stories of heartbreak. Others simply thanked me for showing them that healing was possible. It was during one of these events that I met Naomi, a single mother of two who had left an abusive marriage just months earlier. She approached me after a speaking engagement, clutching her young daughter's hand and holding back tears. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I saw so much of my former self in her. In her hesitation, her self-doubt, the way she apologized for taking up space. "You're already doing it," I told her. "The hardest part is deciding to start. The rest is one step at a time." Naomi and I stayed in touch, and over the years I watched her rebuild her life. She went back to school, started a career, and even published a book of her own. Watching her thrive felt like a full-circle moment, a reminder of how far I'd come and how far I still had to go. Aaron and I eventually moved into a small house just outside the city, a charming place with a garden that quickly became my sanctuary. I spent hours tending to the flowers and vegetables, finding peace in the rhythm of the seasons. It was here, in this quiet oasis, that I found the inspiration for my next book. A novel this time, one that wove fiction with themes of healing and self-discovery. Writing it felt like breathing. The words flowed effortlessly, as though they had been waiting all along. The book, The Garden Within, became an unexpected success, earning praise for its authenticity and depth. Critics called it a masterpiece of emotional honesty. But what mattered most to me were the letters from readers who saw themselves in its pages. One letter, in particular, stayed with me, a young girl who wrote about leaving her abusive boyfriend after reading my book. "Your story gave me the courage to believe I deserved better," she wrote. "Thank you for helping me save my life." By now, Aaron and I had built a life so rich with love and shared dreams that my past felt like another lifetime. Still, there were moments when the scars of my history would surface. A sharp pang of distrust, a fleeting insecurity. Aaron understood this about me and never made me feel ashamed of it. Instead, he met those moments with patience and reassurance, reminding me that healing wasn't a straight line. "You're not broken, Emma," he said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You're human. And that's what makes you so beautiful." As the years rolled on, my life continued to expand in ways I never imagined. Aaron and I traveled the world together, ticking off the destinations I dreamed of visiting. The lavender fields of Provence, the bustling streets of Tokyo, the rugged landscapes of New Zealand. Each place brought new adventures, new memories, and a deeper appreciation for the life we had built. At home, I found myself drawn more and more to mentoring others. I started a nonprofit organization, Rebuild, aimed at helping women who were starting over after trauma, whether it was divorce, abuse, or loss. We offered workshops, financial counseling, therapy resources, and community support. Watching these women transform their lives became one of the greatest joys of mine. One day, as I was organizing an event for Rebuild, I received an unexpected email. It was from James. I hadn't heard from him in years, and seeing his name in my inbox sent a jolt through me. For a moment, I debated ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The message was short and surprisingly heartfelt. He had read one of my books, he said, and wanted to thank me for sharing my story. "I see now how much I hurt you," he wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming a better person." I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the email. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a quiet sense of closure. James's actions had once defined the worst period of my life, but now they were just a footnote in a much larger story. As I reflect on the journey that brought me here, I'm struck by the unexpected beauty of it all. The pain, the heartbreak, the moments when I thought I'd never recover. They were all part of a greater tapestry, threads that led me to a life richer and fuller than I could have imagined. I think back to the list I made all those years ago. Every dream, every goal has been realized in one form or another. But the truth is, the most important things weren't on that list. I never could have planned for the woman I would become, the love I would find in myself, or the joy of helping others rebuild their lives. Life is still messy, unpredictable, and full of surprises. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. No matter how deep the storm cuts, the sun always finds a way to break through. And when it does, the world looks more beautiful than ever. As the years continued to unfold, my life became a steady rhythm of fulfillment and discovery. The nonprofit Rebuild flourished beyond my wildest expectations. What had started as a modest support group had grown into a national movement. We opened chapters in cities across the country, partnering with local organizations to provide housing, career training, and mental health services to women in need. It became a beacon for those who felt lost in their pain, a lifeline that I wished I'd had when my own life had shattered. But even with the success of Rebuild, I remained grounded in the stories of the women we served. I visited shelters, sat in circles during support meetings, and listened as they shared their struggles. There was something humbling about being trusted with their pain. I recognized pieces of myself in each of them, the doubt, the fear, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. One woman, Brianna, left a lasting impression on me. She was in her mid-30s, with a quiet strength that reminded me of a storm just waiting to pass. Brianna had fled an abusive marriage with nothing but her 2 daughters and a small suitcase. She arrived at one of our shelters bruised, both physically and emotionally, but determined to rebuild for her children. "I don't know where to start," she told me one evening as we sat in the shelter's modest kitchen. "It's like everything I had is gone." "You start with what's left," I said gently. "Even if it's just you and your girls, that's enough to build something new." Brianna did just that. Over the next year, she found a job, moved into her own apartment, and even enrolled in community college to finish the degree she'd abandoned years ago. Watching her transformation was a reminder of why I had started Rebuild in the first place. It wasn't just about recovery, it was about rediscovering who you could be. At home, life with Aaron remained a source of constant joy and comfort. We had built a partnership that felt like an unshakable foundation, one rooted in respect and shared dreams. We spent our days planning small adventures, from hiking trips to long drives where we'd get lost on purpose, discovering hidden diners and picturesque overlooks. One summer, Aaron suggested we turn a portion of our backyard into a community garden. It was an idea so simple and beautiful that I wondered why we hadn't thought of it sooner. Within weeks, we had gathered neighbors, friends, and even some of the women from Rebuild to start planting. The garden became a gathering place, a symbol of growth and renewal that extended beyond the soil. The next significant milestone came when a filmmaker approached me about adapting After the Storm into a movie. First, I was hesitant. My story was so deeply personal, and the idea of seeing it fictionalized on the big screen felt both thrilling and terrifying. But after several conversations, I realized this was another opportunity to reach people who might feel alone in their struggles. The process was surreal. I consulted on the script, helping the writers capture the essence of my journey without sensationalizing the pain. Watching the actors bring my experiences to life was emotional, especially the scenes that depicted the betrayal and heartbreak I had worked so hard to move past. But it was also healing, a way of reclaiming that part of my life and turning it into art. When the film premiered, Aaron and I walked the red carpet together. I wore a simple, elegant dress that made me feel confident and radiant, a far cry from the woman who had once doubted her worth. The movie was a critical and commercial success, but the best part was hearing from audience members who left the theater inspired to face their own challenges. As my work and personal life thrived, I began to think more deeply about legacy. What would I leave behind for the people I'd touched, for the women who came after me? The answer came during a late-night conversation with Aaron as we sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching fireflies dance in the yard. Have you ever thought about writing something bigger? Aaron asked, his voice thoughtful. Bigger? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. You've written about your story, your healing. But what if you wrote something that was a guide for others? Something they could turn to when they needed hope. The idea planted itself firmly in my mind. Over the next year, I worked on a book that combined personal anecdotes, lessons from my journey, and practical advice for overcoming adversity. I called it Rebuilding the Soul. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a roadmap for resilience, filled with exercises, affirmations, and insights from the countless women I had met through Rebuild. The book became a bestseller, resonating with readers far and wide. I traveled across the country for signings and workshops, meeting people whose lives had been touched by my words. Each interaction reaffirmed my belief in the power of shared stories. We were all more alike than we realized, bound by the universal desire to heal and grow. As the years passed, Aaron and I grew older together, but our love only deepened. We celebrated milestones with quiet grace, content in the life we had built. When I turned 50, Aaron surprised me with a trip to Tuscany, a destination that had been on my unofficial bucket list for years. We spent 2 weeks exploring the rolling hills, sipping wine, and marveling at how far we had come. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a vineyard, Aaron took my hand. Do you ever think about what life might have been like if things had gone differently? He asked. I considered the question, thinking of the pain and heartbreak that had once consumed me. Sometimes, I admitted, but I wouldn't change a thing. Every step, even the hardest ones, brought me here. To this moment. To you. Aaron smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. In the quiet moments when the house was still and the world outside seemed to pause, I would reflect on the journey that had brought me to this place. My life had been a tapestry of loss and love, failure and triumph, despair and hope. And though the scars of my past remained, they no longer defined me. Instead, they were reminders of the strength I had found within myself, the strength to rebuild, to dream, to love again. The storms of life had shaped me, but they hadn't broken me. They had taught me how to stand tall, even in the face of chaos. And as I moved forward hand in hand with the man I loved, I knew that the best chapters were still unwritten, waiting to unfold in the light of a new day. As I entered my 60s, life felt both expansive and peaceful. The intense chaos of my younger years had given way to a gentler rhythm, one that allowed me to savor every moment. Aaron and I had settled into a life that was rich in its simplicity. Shared breakfasts on the porch, long walks in the woods behind our home, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing we'd built a life full of meaning. But even in this calm, there was no stagnation. I discovered that life, when lived fully, is a constant evolution. The lessons of the past didn't end with the healing of my heart. They deepened, revealing new layers of understanding as I aged. One of the most profound changes came when I became a mentor to younger women, navigating the aftermath of heartbreak and betrayal. I officially launched Rebuild Mentors, a branch of my nonprofit dedicated to one-on-one guidance and peer-led support groups. Women from all walks of life volunteered as mentors, sharing their experiences to help others find their way forward. Being a mentor myself brought me an unexpected joy. One young woman I worked closely with, Ava, reminded me so much of the person I had been decades ago. Cautious, hesitant, and unsure if she could trust her own instincts. She'd left a long-term relationship that had eroded her confidence, and she was struggling to find her footing. I don't think I'll ever feel whole again, Ava confessed one day during a walk in the community garden. How do you even start to rebuild when you've been so broken? You don't wait to feel whole, I told her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You rebuild piece by piece, even when it feels impossible. And one day you'll look back and realize you were never as broken as you thought. You were just waiting to grow into someone stronger. Watching Ava flourish over the next few years was one of the greatest rewards of my life. She started her own business, reconnected with her passions, and eventually met someone who treated her with the love and respect she deserved. At her wedding, she asked me to give a toast, and as I stood before her friends and family, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Not just for her, but for the legacy of strength and healing we had created together. Meanwhile, Aaron and I continued to deepen our shared life. He was my partner in every sense of the word, but also my greatest source of inspiration. As we aged, I found myself drawn to capturing the beauty of ordinary moments. The way he hummed to himself while fixing the leaky faucet, the soft crinkle of his eyes when he laughed, the unspoken understanding that passed between us in moments of quiet. Aaron encouraged me to write again, this time about the smaller, subtler joys of life after loss. The result was a series of essays that I eventually compiled into a book titled The Everyday Miracles. It was a reflection on the beauty of second chances and the unexpected grace found in life's simplest moments. The book struck a chord with readers, many of whom were navigating transitions of their own, retirement, empty nests, aging parents, or the loss of loved ones. I received letters from people thanking me for reminding them that life didn't end with change. It began anew. As my own children grew older, I became a grandmother twice. First to a feisty little girl named Lily, and later to her quiet, thoughtful brother Caleb. They brought a light into my life that I hadn't realized I was missing. Lily had Aaron's adventurous spirit, always asking questions and darting from one discovery to the next. Caleb, on the other hand, was more like me, content to sit quietly, observe and reflect. I saw in them the endless possibilities of the future, and I felt a fierce determination to pass on what I had learned. I began writing letters to them, long and detailed, sharing stories about my life, the mistakes I had made, and the lessons I had learned along the way. I wanted them to know that life wasn't a straight line but a series of twists and turns that, if embraced, could lead to something extraordinary. When I turned 70, Aaron and I decided to take one last grand adventure together. We sold the house we had lived in for years and bought a small RV. Our plan was to travel the country, visiting national parks, small towns, and every little hidden gem we could find. The open road felt like freedom. We spent our days hiking through lush forests, standing in awe of towering red rock canyons, and sitting beneath endless starlit skies. Every place we visited felt like a chapter in a new story, one we were writing together. One evening, as we camped near a quiet lake in Montana, Aaron turned to me, his face illuminated by the glow of the fire. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked, his voice soft. I smiled, looking out at the still waters reflecting the sky. "All the time. And I wouldn't trade a single step of it." Eventually, our travels slowed, and we returned to a quieter life. Aaron and I settled in a cozy cottage near the coast, where we spent our days walking along the beach, hosting dinners for friends and family, and soaking in the joy of simply being together. When Aaron passed peacefully in his sleep one crisp autumn morning, I was heartbroken but not unprepared. We had talked about this moment many times, about how life was fleeting but beautiful, and how the love we'd shared would outlast anything else. In the days after his death, I found solace in the memories we had created and the life we had built. Aaron had taught me that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up every day, even when it was hard, and choosing to love anyway. Now, in my 80s, I find myself reflecting on a life that has been full beyond measure. The nonprofit continues to thrive, led by a new generation of women who are just as passionate about helping others as I was. My books remain on shelves, their messages continuing to inspire people I'll never meet. But what matters most to me are the relationships I've built, the lives I've touched, and the love I've given and received. Sitting by the window in my little cottage, watching the waves roll in, I feel an overwhelming sense of peace. Life has been messy, unpredictable, and at times heartbreakingly difficult. But it has also been breathtakingly beautiful. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The storms will come, but so will the calm. The losses will hurt, but the love will heal. And in the end, it's the courage to rebuild, to keep moving forward one step at a time, that turns even the darkest moments into something extraordinary. My story isn't over yet, but if it were to end here, I'd have no regrets. I've lived, I've loved, and I've rebuilt. And that, I think, is more than enough. In the twilight of my life, I often sit by the window of my cozy cottage, wrapped in a soft knit shawl, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The ocean's waves crash rhythmically against the shore, a soothing reminder of life's ebb and flow. The house is filled with echoes of the past, laughter from family gatherings, the scent of Aaron's favorite coffee, the rustle of pages from the countless books I've written and read. These moments of stillness are my favorite, where memories drift in and out like the tide. I think of the young woman I once was, so unsure of her worth, and marvel at how far she came. I think of the betrayals that broke me, the love that mended me, and the purpose that gave me new life. Each chapter, no matter how painful, played its role in creating the story I'm now so proud to call mine. One afternoon, as I sort through old photographs and letters, I come across the list I wrote all those years ago, the dreams of a younger Emma who didn't yet know what lay ahead. The paper is worn, the ink faded, but the words still hold power. Write a book. Visit Paris. Learn how to paint. Open a coffee shop. Fall in love, really fall in love. I smile, tears welling up as I read each line. Every dream on that list has come true, though not always in the way I expected. The books I've written are more than I ever imagined. Paris became a sanctuary of self-discovery. Painting taught me to express emotions words couldn't capture. And while I never opened a coffee shop, the community garden and gatherings we shared were a perfect substitute. And love, true deep soul-healing love, found me when I was ready for it, in Erin's steadfast embrace. Setting the list aside, I take out a fresh sheet of paper. Life may be winding down, but I'm not done dreaming. I write a new list, shorter and simpler this time. Cherish every day. Share my wisdom with those who need it. Watch Lily and Caleb grow into extraordinary people. Laugh often. Leave the world a little kinder than I found it. I pin the new list to the bulletin board in my kitchen, a quiet promise to myself that there's still more to live for, even as the pages of my story grow thin. One crisp morning, I wake to the sound of seagulls outside my window and the smell of salt in the air. I feel a sense of lightness, as though everything is exactly as it should be. I sit in my favorite chair by the window watching the waves, the sunlight dancing on their crests like gold. As I close my eyes, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the heartbreak that led me here, the strength I found in its wake, and the love that filled every corner of my life. Erin's voice seems to whisper in the breeze, a gentle reminder that he's still with me, in every memory, every heartbeat. I take a deep breath, my heart full, my soul at peace. And with that, my story comes to a quiet, beautiful close.